Welcome back to Middle East Culture and Arts. I'm very happy today to have another guest for an interview, a friend and colleague born and raised in the Middle East and a lifelong artist recognized throughout the United States and around the world. So she is a special treat. We get to explore all aspects of this course. And I'm going to ask Dorit to introduce herself to you. Dorit, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nancy. It's a pleasure.
What would you like to say to my students in class to introduce yourself?
Just as an introduction, because it'll help give them context, that yes, I was born in Tel Aviv, Israel, and I was born to Holocaust survivors. So I was born into a very diasporic culture of survivors in the 1950s. So I would be considered, the first generation of Israeli citizen. And lived there till age 8. My family then moved to Montreal, Canada. So we moved, and something I can say that might be instructive in terms of questions of culture and identity. I recognized in Montreal that because I started public school there, and the public school system in Montreal, Canada, was divided into Protestant and Catholic. And the Protestants could not go to the Catholic schools, and the Catholics could not go to the Protestant schools. It was quite a wedge, which was a very systemic wedge in Quebec, Montreal in general, between the French and the English, a carryover from the old wars between France and England, was still part of Quebec. And the separatist movement really started to surge, especially in the 70s there. But when I went, so I, as an immigrant Jew, was not accepted into the Catholic school system. We were excluded. So we were streamlined into the English Protestant system. I learned very soon, I was a very questioning child, so I learned very soon that I thought back, well, wait a minute, in Israel, identity went like this. You're either a Jew or you don't exist. So who am I here? Because the same circumstances were not in Canada.
Yes.
And I realized very quickly, I said, well, I'm the other. I'm not the privileged one here. I'm not the one that is at the top of at the top of the heap.
Well, you were the outsider coming in. Most people who have had the outside coming in experience feel like they're looking in. There is this inner group. Is that how you experienced it?
Well, more than that, because we were censored, and it was a lot of anti-Semitism.
Yes, so I hear that too.
We were the other as the immigrants. There were many immigrant groups there, but the Jews,
you were exiled. You were
Jews
rejected.
Were more on the periphery. So I learned very soon, by the age of 10, how culturally constructed identity is. Because my identity as a Jew in Montreal was very different than my identity as a Jew in Israel.
Wow.
And that's how I'll introduce myself.
Wow. Well, and you can hear that I'm interviewing an artist today. That's great. Because I do want to ask you, because different people have different views on what is the Middle East, but then I'm going to ask you for your perspective, views on culture. And I think you've already given us a good taste of that, but let's go a little bit backward. How do you, when people say Middle East, and I did not name this course, it was named Middle East, right? How do you see that phrase, that part of the world, that geography? What does Middle East mean to you?
It means complexity. It means confusion. It means tribal. It means ancient. It means Semitic, and great differences over centuries. It means many various wars up and down
Yes.
between tribes. It means colonization. It means the British becoming the mandate of Palestine. It means geopolitics.
Yeah. No, you're doing the different perspectives here. Yeah, it's enormous and potent. And in that, we are exploring many different cultures. And in the class, that's just an introductory class, I can only start to introduce a few. My students have the ability to choose other interests, whether personal, minority, whatever, But for you, how do you define culture? How do you view culture?
Culture is what happens when people come together over time and develop priorities and protocols and customs and traditions. And of course, there's all kinds of complexities like who's in control and power in terms of the belief systems and the verticality of who's on top. So culture to me is very complex. Culture to me is also, in its best form, community and what we share, what can be shared, what becomes familiar to people who spend time together. And I also see it as very used and manipulated by power structures that take hold of culture itself.
Yeah. That manipulate and divide us. And yes, we are seeing quite a bit of that right now. Forget Middle Eastern culture and arts. We're just seeing it everywhere. Yes.
It's human. We've always seen that.
Yes.
It's history.
Yes. Okay. Now here's the question. What is your cultural identity?
It's like asking me what's my religion in a way, because I identify deeply as Jewish culturally in terms of my history and my heritage. But in terms of my beingness in the world today, as in this body,
right,
I hold my identity within. My identity is within. I don't identify with things very, very strongly with things outside me.
Yes,
because I've had to shift where my identity has been and what I've identified with.
Yes.
So I've learned to take identity with a grain of salt and recognize that my identity is a landscape of my experiences. It's a integrated and sometimes not, also confusion, of everything I've experienced and how I hold it and form a sense of self. And then, of course, there's all the labels that are put on top of me, which some of them are gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, class. All those things are defined. I don't so much identify with them from the inside out. But
yes, but you're aware that other people
I'm
see
very
you.
aware of
Yes.
it. And it took me a long time to understand how I could hold an identity of myself and become self-possessed rather than confused by all the categories that I've been fit into or assumed to belong
or
to.
that are used to classify you.
Yeah.
You know, as a woman who is a mixture of immigrant identities, myself, and born and raised here, I do think I understand some of what you're describing. It is the experience of those who are mixed, who are hybrids of different kind, because we have to assess for ourselves, who are we, right? And it's been fascinating for me to realize that as an American, I hold myself much differently than some of the Americans that I meet who have never had that experience of cultural mixing. So thank you for that.
And I find that truly in my late life liberating, because in my earlier life, I felt isolated, confused, and I didn't know where I belonged. So it was very constrictive. But I had to develop a sense of interiority, and it's taken years. So as a senior, I can say
Yes.
I've arrived at a place of integration, but that hasn't always been my experience.
Yeah. No, I think most young people will identify with that sense of confusion, conflicting identities within. And it does take time to have a sense of who am I in this world? Who do I want to be? You know, as a tall woman, I will say I was, and an older sibling, I just was born to protect those who were more vulnerable. It's just nature of my birth and being. And some men listening are going to go, oh, I understand that. That's how I experienced myself too. But what you're describing is how all of those experiences, we start to integrate them over time, which is really a relief to say, yes.
That's liberation.
Yes. Now, your story journey, you've given us a bit of it. You've also, once you were in Canada, at some point you decided to come to the United States. And I think that's probably quite a part of your story as well. But I'm going to go on with other questions, and I think we'll get to it as I ask you about what do you, given your experience, and you know, you and I have talked about this, and I don't think any of my questions cover this, but if you don't mind my reminding you of this, you talked about your early years in Israel and something feeling off to you about living there. And I think that's important to bring up for students to understand where we're going with this discussion. Now, I'm going to say we are living through a time where I am so gratified that Palestinian people are being recognized as human and worthy for the first time in many, many years, because I have tried to help them, and I have worked with Israelis and Jews from many countries who share my concern and my desire. But right now we are in such a polarized, what is it? It's a vindictive period where hatred is being spewed around like maybe it hasn't been since World War II, frankly. As we get to the Holocaust, maybe that is when we last saw this. And so I want my students to relax and listen and learn and not make assumptions. We're not taking sides with or against anyone in this discussion. We're discussing the complexity of human experience here. And as a child, I would say most children are much more honest and aware without filters in their early years. So they pick up on what is going on, what adults have chosen to ignore or avoid. That's my experience working in the schools. And so you had told me when you were living in Israel, and you were one of the first Israelis, something didn't feel right. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. Well, since I can remember, I sensed I couldn't understand really where I was or what was happening ever from birth. And that's and I'll get to something very specific about occupation in a minute. But
yes,
before that, before recognizing a distortion around occupation, I understood something else. I understood, or I didn't understand it, but I experienced numbness and hysteria as a child from all the adults because they were all survivors.
Yes.
And there was no mental health. There was no dialogue about what did you experience? What does it feel like to
How
be
are
a
you doing?
survivor?
Yes.
Who did you lose? There was no conversations about any of that. And these adults were, including my own my parents and grandparents, were, I would say, in shock. From my perspective, looking back, they were in shock. And they were not necessarily, to me as a child, nice people, because they didn't have, a lot of them, extra place and space and emotion to even be kind to me.
Well, to be there for another human being. I think when
Compassion.
someone is struggling with mental health trauma issues,
Yeah.
they didn't have
Well,
compassion.
there was compassion, empathy was, not that I understood any of that anyway, but I understood that it didn't feel safe to me.
Okay.
I felt
Okay.
unsafe as a child,
Okay.
and I was quite catatonic. I really pulled in and became a watcher and a listener and very astute, because I asked hundreds. I always asked questions because I always noticed things off. I always did, and I noticed that was off. I said, "What?" Not that I knew anything else, because that's what I was born into, but it felt awful. And I kept asking, in my little Hebrew, why is she talking a different language? Why? I don't understand. Everybody was coming from dozens of different cultures,
Yeah.
over hundreds of years of living in those cultures. So very acculturated into other cultures, sounding different, looking different, eating different foods, different mannerisms.
Right. Different language. Yes.
But we weren't allowed to talk about any of it. We were only allowed to really recognize that we were all Jews, because that was what had brought us together in this foreign place. This place was very far away from Europe. I mean,
Yes.
this was like very foreign. It was not an easy, comfortable, familiar place after
Right.
hundreds of years of diaspora, thousands of years of diaspora, right? So it was not comfortable. I noticed that. And I noticed differences between people, the adults, not the children, because we were all, the little ones were all born there. So we were all in this same place of confusion or trying to make sense of it. But I noticed that the environment around me of adults was very confusing. That was the first thing I noticed,
Okay.
something being off. And then I think there's something, we talked about this, I shared this with you. I have a memory after I found a photograph of myself, age 5, in 1956, in kindergarten. And it stimulated the recall, the memory of why that photograph was taken and what was happening. It was me and maybe 7 other kindergarten children from the class I was in were escorted out of the classroom, outside, given coats to wear, so it must have been winter, and each handed a small pot with earth and a tree sapling, a little sapling. And we were just given it, and we were told to stand in a line. We were all confused, and it was someone not from our school that came to talk to us, a stranger. And I remember the person saying to us, "You are our new Jewish roots for our new country. You are our Jewish roots. And this tree that you're holding is you. You are the Jewish root, and you, the little tree, we're going to take you to the Israeli forest to plant your Jewish roots in the Israeli forest." And I didn't know what,
As a kindergartner.
I had no idea what they were saying, what they
Yeah.
were talking about. And the other children looked really confused, but I, of course, always was the one that put my hand up and asked the question. And I said, I remember this like it was yesterday. I said in my little voice, What's a Jewish root? I'm just a little girl. And I was told to be quiet.
Wow.
And that stayed with me, and I didn't know what to make of it, and I didn't understand it. But it started to align and connect with other things that I had noticed. Like I would ask my mother, why can't I play with that little boy or that little girl? I want to play. No, and they were Palestinian. No, you can't cross the street. You can't play with them. Why? We can't talk about it. You just can't. Okay. Always no conversation. Or in the marketplace, there was many Palestinian women selling fruits and vegetables as others.
Yes.
And who are those people? And they dress differently and they talked a different language, but they were always there.
Well, and my students may not know because we're not doing any kind of history with particular countries, but Palestinians have lived in Israel, was created, and the Zionists, we're going to have to get into some of this for them to understand. Okay, you go ahead.
I'll give you a quick history lesson.
Yes, hit quick history. Good.
So
context.
Jews, a lot of Jews back in the Inquisition from Spain, when
Spanish
Jews
Inquisition
were
Catholic Church, yes,
from Spain in the 1500s.
Yes,
and they were expelled. They either went east and over the centuries went further and further east from Spain into Europe.
Right. So France and Germany and
Britain,
Ukraine,
all
Poland,
the countries,
yes,
all the way to Ukraine and Russia.
Russia, yes.
And then others went to northern Africa.
Yes.
And Syria and Iraq and Egypt and the Arabic countries, and a lot of them were already there, right?
Yes.
I mean, the Jews were dispersed.
Well, the Old Testament for the Christians in the class who've read the Old Testament gives some history.
Well, they were dispersed by both the Egyptian Empire and the Roman Empire.
Yes.
So that's like thousands of years.
Yes.
So there was dispersion over centuries, but the big 1500s, where a lot of the Jews were in Spain, were pushed out, and that's when it started to inhabit Europe.
Right.
In Eastern Europe, especially in Ukraine, Bulgaria, the Eastern European countries, there were pogroms. Pogroms are small genocides against Jewish populations local to a country. And especially in Ukraine, there were, in fact, in Ukraine, the biggest pogrom was in 1922. And my mother lived through it and survived. Her family was expelled. And the first time they were expelled as refugees was from Ukraine to Poland. My mother was 2 years old. And it was thousands of Jews were murdered. And it was actually studied by Hitler and the Nazis. And he came up with the final solution, the final solution from the pogroms.
Would you explain this like racism? How would you explain what was happening with these horrible attacks?
Racism.
Like racism, yes.
But there was a kind, I wouldn't even call it racism because race is a relatively more recent term. It was just a hatred of a certain people.
Yes.
And I wouldn't call it race, but racism does the same thing.
Well, I'm trying to give my students
it's parallel. That the hatred of racism and dehumanizing people is as old as human beings.
Yes.
It's before the term race or racism, right?
Hate crimes.
Hate crimes and just the belittling and the stratification of people.
Yes.
In a group, in a tribe, in a town, in a city, forever.
Well, and tribal, I will say, I was going to say this earlier. Many of us, if we go back into our ancestry
Yes.
far enough, find we have tribal roots
Of course.
and tribes with warfare and
Yes.
revenge and all of
Absolutely.
it as old as humanity.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So because the Jews were, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, were it received such it was unsafe in Eastern Europe.
Yes.
The words or the idea of Zionism took root
Okay.
only in the 1890s, 1895.
Okay.
It's young.
Yes. Close to 1900s.
It's a political ideology. It's not a religion or an identity of people. It came as is this a possible solution? Zionism is we need to find a land for Jews,
right. How do we create a safe space?
a safe space.
Yes.
And they originally didn't necessarily think of Palestine. One of the first places that was thought of was Uganda.
Wow.
And there were other potentials, right? But it became clear that it would make sense in the Middle East because that's where the Jews originated from 2,000 years earlier.
Yes, but not only the Jews. There,
No.
There were
But
other
no.
people that originated.
No.
Yes.
A lot of tribes originated there,
Yes.
but I'm saying the Jews as a tribe originated there.
Yes.
And they, for centuries, and they lived amongst many other tribes, Semitic, including Palestinians, but many other tribes as well.
Yes.
Names, the Babylonians, the there were many cultures over centuries.
Well, and some of my students are studying some
We'll
of
know
these
this.
ancient.
We'll know
yes. So good. We have a context.
So the Jews were one tribe in the land, in the Middle East.
So the Zionists said, and they eventually decided this is where so many of us are from. We're going to create this safe space here where Israel was created.
We're going to try and convince Jews to come back here. And also the word Zion, was an original term that Jews used in the land. They called their area the land of Zion.
Yes.
So Zionism was about the land. Where's an original place for Jews to consider land, their home?
You know, I was invited to the West Bank and lived in Bethlehem. And obviously, this is also a place where Christians see
Yes.
the beginnings of
Yes.
their faith and religion. And the Muslims
Yes.
that I met there were worshiping in Jerusalem
Yes.
as well.
Yes. So we're Armenians.
Oh, yes, they
right?
still
So
are. They still are.
The old city of Jerusalem still has the 5 original populations
Yes.
and in little divisions in the old walled city still exist in the way they lived millenniums ago.
Well, and where we were going, we were talking about your childhood, and I wanted my students to know there are Palestinian Israelis, there are Palestinians who live in Israel, and there are those who go into Israel to work. This is not just, on TV, separated, divided.
Let me explain that. So
Okay.
long story. So I'm not going to go through. It's very
No, it's
complex,
too
and there's
much.
lots of nuances that are not reported. But Zionism had many factions. It wasn't one faction.
Right, that's important.
And that's really important, but I'm not going to go. That's a whole
Yes,
other lesson.
It's just good to know.
It's good to know. And there's a lot of contestation about what would be the politic of the area.
Yes.
It was Britain in 1917, after the Ottoman Empire fell, which ruled the Middle East and Turkey and everything.
Yes.
That was when, in 1915, was when the Zionists could talk to the British, who took over, colonized several of parts of the Ottoman Empire, as did France.
Yes.
They created, Egypt and Jordan, various parts of it. Lebanon was taken by the French. I mean, they were all
Right.
these nations were turned into nations only in the early 1900s by European colonizers.
Yeah.
And they are made up of the tribal factions that lived in those areas.
Yes.
The Egyptians are different than the Iraqis, blah blah blah, different tribal, but they turned into nation states by colonizers because they could use the resources.
Yeah, that's
Right.
normally yes.
Palestine, the land that was called Palestine, that was kind of left and wasn't turned into a nation state
Right.
because it had no resources. There was nothing a colonizer could get from it. But they had to be ruled because they were feared they would rise up and crush the colonizers, right? So they had to be ruled. So the British took over the mandate. They mandated control over Palestine, but they gave them no citizen rights, no voting rights, no rights. They just took over. It was like a loose rule without rights. Like in Egypt, they got citizenship, they got blah, blah, blah. They got identities that were connected to the nation. Palestinians did not, or the Bedouins, who
Right.
lived there as well,
Yes.
did not. They were just under the hegemony of Britain, right? And in 1917, the forefathers, the leaders of the idea of Zionism, because there wasn't an enactment yet, it was still an idea. One of them was Theodore Herzl. He wasn't the only one. Went to the Brits. He was clever, and he said to them, "You're ruling, you have the mandate over Palestine, but there's nothing here for you. You just have to rule it, but there's nothing here for you."
Right.
The Jews want it, but the European Jews want it because we are being killed in
Right.
Eastern Europe. And this is an exclamation point. The European Jews, not the North African Jews, not the Arabic Jews who lived in Arabic countries. The European Jews who also became post-Enlightenment, were educated, and were more like the Brits than the Palestinians. And he said, we need this land, and we will take it over and rule it for you. We
Okay.
will come here. We need a place. Please give us a place. This part of it used to be ours. We just want a part so we can be free.
And
But
safe.
you don't have to worry about us because we're very much like you. We're European Jews,
Okay.
right? Of 500 years,
Right.
Not nothing. And the Brits in 1917 signed a declaration called the Balfour Declaration. It was
Right.
Lord Balfour that said there will be a time where this land will be owned by the Jews. They didn't say when, but we were like, we're looking, we're paying attention, we're going to honor this at some point.
Right.
That was 1917. The Zionists, in a sense, and most Jews in Europe were not coming because it was like, go where? We have like a fine house here. We're doctors. We're doing
Right,
this.
we're doing
like
really well.
Going where to land that has nothing.
Right.
To a place where we were 2,000 years ago. Like what?
Why would we want to
Why
do
would we
this?
want to? So there was a lot of factions of Jews that said, absolutely not. We just need to integrate and live our lives.
They were
and-
hoping for the best where they
yeah,
were.
which they always did for hundreds of years. They
Yes.
proved that they could do it. So the Jewish population in Palestine was less than 2%. It was a very large Palestinian population who
Right.
had lived
and
there for
most Jews
centuries,
had left.
right?
Yes.
A long, long time ago.
Yes.
2% stayed, and between 95 and 1930, the Zionists kept trying to draw people in with slogans and all kinds of promises, and the pogroms kept happening, so it was not getting better. There were aliyahs. Aliyahs mean groups of immigration, waves of immigration, aliyah.
Yeah.
And there were about 5 or 6 of them. But by the 30s, the Jewish population grew to about 6%. That's still very little.
Very little.
Very little. But the Holocaust happened.
The Holocaust, yes.
And then 6 million Jews were murdered. That is like not nothing. That was huge.
Yes.
And then there were so many survivors with no one wanted them. My father, who was a survivor, tried. They couldn't come to America. They were turning ships away.
No, I know. That is some of the history. Just a second.
That was happening all over the world.
Well, it was, though. I think some of the Latin countries were more open
Argentina,
and welcoming. Central America.
Yes.
They were. But the U.S. was not as open as we would assume they would have been given the number of Jews who live here now. They weren't. So there was this horrible situation. And some of my students, if they want to read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, or there's a Laura Blumenthal, she wrote a book called Revenge about getting to know a Palestinian. If they want to read some of those artists to get a snapshot into, the situation, they can. But most of my students are just getting a broad introduction.
So I'll tell you abroad what happened when Israel was mandated. It was created by the United Nations.
Yes, and they also offered Palestinians Palestinian land. That's my understanding.
Yeah, but it's bogus because Palestinians already had land.
Well, it
was partitioned like 1/3, 2/3 Palestinian to Jewish, and it was
it was very unfair, wasn't it?
Totally. You're also negotiating unfairly. You're negotiating.
Well, and suddenly it wasn't really negotiating, was it? It was sort of a take it or leave it for Palestinians.
Well, it became that, but there was negotiation. But it was very, as a mediator, I understand. Mediation has to be there has to be some equal agency between parties.
Well,
right, or you have to take that into consideration as a mediator.
It's a very unusual situation, too.
So it wasn't. And so the Palestinians were definitely, didn't even have necessarily the centuries of sophistication in the land of...
Well, in a sense of what was actually going on. It all just was happening.
It was forced.
Yes.
And so... 750,000 Palestinians were pushed out of their homes.
Yes.
And
are in Lebanon, Jordan.
They went
around the world.
But also they went to the West Bank.
Yes.
And to Gaza. 20% stayed within the boundaries of Israel and became Israelis.
Okay.
So 20% of Palestinians are Palestinian Israelis.
Yes.
And the other 80% either live in the occupied territories, Gaza, the West Bank, or the Arabic countries, Lebanon, mostly Lebanon and Jordan.
One of the reasons I wanted to introduce this is when you talked about as a child wanting to play with the neighbor and being told you can't. I was never told I couldn't play with my African American neighbors in my neighborhood. But I grew up during segregation when we were bused to different schools. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until 6th grade that those of us who lived next door to each other could play together at the same school. So I have a very clear memory of this.
Absolutely.
There's something really wrong about what's going on here.
You know what? In Israel to this day, education is segregated.
Yes.
There were in the line of kindergarten students who were holding little, the little Jewish root trees. There were no Palestinian children.
No.
And I sensed that. That's what got me started in recognizing something was terribly wrong here.
Not everyone is here.
That's right. And most little children didn't recognize that and didn't ask that question.
It would be interesting to have a conversation with the circle at the moment with you around some of this, because you and I both know there are many Israelis and Jewish people who very much want a different society, a more inclusive society.
Yes, but it's not a majority in Israel. And in fact, my own family has excommunicated me. So it's very divisive.
Oh, well,
within
Israel
families.
has more conflict within than almost any country that I've worked with, and people don't realize it's not. I'm not talking about between Palestinians and Israelis. I'm talking about among the Israeli residents.
But now it's true in America. I work a
Yes.
lot with Jewish groups, and
Oh, I'm
it's
sure.
and I did a whole half year at UC Santa Barbara with Jewish students after October 7th. It is more divided and confused
I'm sure.
than ever.
than ever. Okay. We may not be able to get off
I know,
all our questions,
yeah.
but this is so important for those of my students who've been fixated on the horrors of the news to understand the history context a little bit. Okay. Oh, this is a strange question to ask you right now, because we've been talking about what concerns you, but let me come back to this later. It's just too off. How do you, as an artist, as a funded, supported, recognized artist, how do you see arts? How do you define arts?
I want to just preface when you said you are a well-supported artist, I'm not. I'm a recognized artist, but I have so many questions and challenges with the art world as a business model that I actually I don't indulge in trying to get support or even sell a lot of my work. So I want to just pull back, because that's a whole other politics.
That's a whole nother course.
It is.
Yes.
It is. But as an artist, oh my gosh. So the arts are super important, but I do not believe that the arts can solve political issues. I really don't. And I also, having been a professional artist most of my life and a teaching artist most of my life, recognize how both the institution, the institution of art making, the
Yes.
MFA program, the museum, the gallery, the collector, it's all connected. It's all interconnected. And it's hermetic. It does not, and a lot of, myself included, but a lot of people I know, believe that they're making very important political statements in their artwork. They're not making political art, but they're commenting on and trying to unpack issues that are cultural. But they're doing it, we are doing it, the system does it in a very hermetic way. So we're talking to each other.
Yes.
So I question that, okay? So when you say what do I think of the arts and what is the role of the arts here, I think that artists, and I started 30 years ago in my career to also work with social justice. And I say I'm an artist working in social justice. I'm not making social justice my artwork.
No, but you are an activist.
I'm activist.
And
So
you are a
I'm not-
mediator.
I'm
So,
not
yes.
commodifying it. And
Yes.
a lot of artists just say, well, I'll just make my art, my studio, the social justice forum. But
Right.
it stays hermetic, and it's to be sold to the collector. I mean, it just doesn't
Well,
work.
that whole piece is
Yeah.
another course.
Yes.
I have a sister who was born very talented with visual arts and won a scholarship at 4 years old to an art institute, very gifted. But and I have a father, I have a brother who teaches music. So I grew up in a very artistic home.
Yeah.
But I distinguish between true art and commercial art because I see the market. We won't go into this whole capitalistic thing, but I see it, and especially the wealthy who buy, the patrons of art, destroying the true artists, because the people who truly create from their heart and soul, which I would hope most are, they are very sensitive people, and they should not be engaging with that market.
Well, they
Right? The popularity thing, right? It's all, so that is a whole nother course
It
here.
is.
But let me keep going here, because we're going to talk about some of what you
And
do.
I want to
Okay.
add something because
Okay.
it
Okay.
speaks to what you're saying. I'll never forget, was it 89 when Czechoslovakia rebelled, pushed against Russia and communism?
Yes.
89, the revolution in Czechoslovakia.
I'm not sure
It
what
was
year.
not was it Czechoslovakia? Yeah, because the president was a writer.
Yeah, there's a very famous leader.
famous
Yeah.
writer,
I'm sorry,
right?
I don't have,
And
yes.
and the front lines of that revolution were artists on the street, not on their canvases.
Well, this, I didn't really plan to talk about this, but since we're talking about violence and war and unrest and social injustice, I have noticed that some artists are like on fire in the midst of the worst of what goes on in politics and society. Some of the famous composers who, in the midst of the battlefield and all, are creating such beauty. There does seem to be a relationship between the energy of the unrest and the
artists
chaos.
need chaos.
Yeah.
We function best under chaos.
Okay, well, that's good news. Right
Or
now,
under unpacking, trying to understand what's not understandable.
Yes, and even try to create some meaning, not
Yes.
at a collective level, but at a personal level.
Even on
to do something.
first on a personal, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the nature of being an artist.
Yeah, okay.
That's the juice of art and art making that needs to be alive, for sure.
Yeah.
It needs to be it's combustible, and it needs to be fueled.
There is a power there. Even
Yeah.
when I have students who have grown up during war as children,
Yeah.
Cambodia, pick the war, Vietnam. And even when they talk in a classroom, it's almost like poetry as they simply describe the experience, right? Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah.
I'm going to be asking you some of the tough questions I was asking others. Most modern cultures in the Middle East are patriarchal. I won't even say arguably, they are patriarchal. Even cultures of violence and war, like the Persian and Ottoman empires. How do you see and explain this, or do you? Tribal.
It comes down. The evolution of human being. It's all the way to the back of the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, Israel's definitely patriarchal. It's a military machine.
Yes.
Even though there's women in the army, it is ruled by men. And it is such a male-oriented society. It drives me crazy. I can't stand it. So it is men have the testosterone and the power, and I don't begin to understand how male energy functions in a body. It's not the same as a woman's. I don't believe it is. But it's driven in aggression. I mean, if you look back at biology, the evolution of biology, every mammal species, it's the male is the
hunter.
Is the hunter
And the protector.
and the progenitor. They fight each other for the woman to seed the
yes,
woman.
of course.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very common.
Yeah.
But the kind of ruthless, senseless violence and attack and rage, that part is beyond what we're looking at here.
It's extreme. It's the extreme case of that symptom of human. It's because humans, I believe, the human psyche has always fascinated me. And being a child of survivors, I've always asked the question, how could humans do this to each other?
Well, you know, Alice Miller was a German
I know her
psychologist
work
who
well.
studied
Yeah.
Hitler
Yeah.
and has studied others who have done the most horrific. And what she found was a repetition compulsion of trauma, of having been had, you know, in a child version, having been abused and attacked, completely neglected,
Yeah.
and repeating on someone else. That's
Yeah.
what she found after studying case studies.
Well, I believe that we are all, having lived through 2,000 years of written history, of current history, of modern times,
Yes.
because we've lived before that too. You know, that just scratches the surface. We each have an accumulation of historic trauma in us.
We all, yes.
And so to
we
be
do
human is to
yes.
live with trauma.
And some
most
people are
people-
able to heal.
And most people don't. Most people don't even look at it.
Well, but
You
most
have to
people
choose
don't.
it.
Most people do not reenact repetition compulsion.
No, that's
It's
extreme.
only 40% that will even do it in their immediate circle.
Yes.
So thank God, not the majority, but still there are cases.
But then there's those who follow them, right? Because
well,
they're
follow and then enable them. And I
Yes.
want to ask you about the U.S., and I think this is particularly important with Israel when we're looking at the Middle East. How do you see the U.S. interfering with what you've seen happening in the Middle East with violence and
the Middle East has
patriarchy
always been interfered with. It's always been used and abused
by the U.S.?
No, by lots of Western nations.
Yes. Okay. Well, you
And
started
nations,
with colonization.
nations and empires and
Yes.
nations in general.
Yes.
U.S. is just
Continuing
more
what
recent.
others.
The West has always used the Jews, I believe, and then
How have they used the Jews?
they've needed to place somebody who is more like the West than the heathen Arabs in the area, which is Israel.
So they need to find a trusted ally, and they are more
created
likely
Israel.
to trust.
They created Israel.
Well, I do believe that the support that the U.S. gives Israel is what has enabled
Yes.
what we've seen with the
Yes,
wars
but
and violence.
yes, it has, and it always has, and it has had the advantages of us other Western nations as well, but the Americans especially the last several decades, and I believe some of that is like with Biden, for example. I really do believe it's out of unconscious guilt.
Well, I was going to ask because the
Because-
U.S. did not welcome Jews
Not
after
only
the
that,
Holocaust.
they didn't enter the war until 42 when most of the Jews were already murdered.
Okay.
And that was because of a century of anti-Semitism in this country.
Now, I have, before I went to the West Bank, researched the U.S. support for Israel. And I would say right now, evangelical Christians are playing a very strong
They've taken
role.
control of it.
They have taken control.
And they're weaponizing and using the Jews again to create these false accusations of anti-Semitism, to weaponize any pushback against supporting Israel in the war in against Gaza. There's a
well, I have a few questions. Let
Yes.
me unpack
Oh, sure.
this a little bit, because this is
I
really
moved too
important.
fast.
It's very, it's complex, and this is an introductory course. Most of my students, if not all, are watching in horror as they see the terrorists attacking, kidnapping in Israel and Israel's attack on Gaza. And we are talking about what has contributed to this horror and tragedy very quickly. I mean, I'm going to say to students, if you are curious about learning more, please make it a topic of research in this class,
lot to be
because
read.
there is you could take a whole course on this. Actually, our history department has decided to do a course, 1,000 Years of Israel and Palestine.
Good.
I don't know who's teaching that course, but yes, if you're curious, forgive us, we can only give you a little sketch overview here. And the European Jews suffered Nazi extermination during World War II. I was born, after World War II. And if what's going on right now is also convoluted with misinformation propaganda about that. And everyone needs to be grounded in reality and facts. Many are fearful, many Jews and Israelis are fearful for their safety, and they remain targets of hate crimes in California, along with the LGBTQ plus communities and the African American communities.
And now the Mexican communities.
Well, that's a whole different topic.
Yeah.
And that's someone in Chicano studies needs to do that, and they probably are right now. I know labor studies is doing quite a bit there. But what do you think, given we're discussing a sort of a broad sweep of a very complicated situation, but you have had such life experience to reflect on all of this. And I hear you say, no, art is not going to save the day. It's a part of a solution with civil society, activism. What do you, as an Israeli, Canadian, American Jew, what do you think might be helpful in such an extreme situation as we're seeing right now? If you were a young person in my class, what would you recommend they do, or how could they educate themselves?
Well, I'll tell you, when I was hired after October 7th,
yes.
I was hired to consult
UC Santa Barbara. And they thought, maybe, I could come in and design public forums, dialogue forums. And I said, absolutely not. I am not going to initiate facilitating dialogue, because most of what's understood and most of what I'm hearing is uneducated spin. And I'm not going to facilitate a dialogue amongst that kind of language. Oh, yes.
What we first need to do is teach-ins. The history needs to be understood.
Okay.
And then listening circles. And I did that for 6 months. I just went all around the campus and put together small groups of 10 people.
Now, there were Jewish students in this?
Yes, I was asked to work with, people on the campus, basically. And
Did you have Palestinian students on campus as well? Were you able to include?
It wasn't specifically Palestinians, and there aren't a lot of Palestinians, but Muslim, and it wasn't just Muslim. It was every group, mostly people of color, who have experienced oppression.
Okay, well,
because they were
concerned. They're all concerned.
Triggered is more I would say.
Okay.
Triggered. And a lot of the people who were in the tents were either anti-Zionist Jews or questioning Zionism as people of color.
Yes,
they were responding through being triggered to their own experiences.
Okay.
Without knowing the histories.
No, and very important work in and of itself.
Exactly. So I said, you're going to need at least a year's worth of small listening circles. You just get small groups and listen to, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? How can you, just to get people to recognize that they're being heard and acknowledged.
Right.
And in particularly the Jews, who were so freaked out about their safety. And that's what I understood as a Jew, how Israel was manipulating, how the creation of Israel manipulated survivors. They said, look, you're coming from a situation where 6 million were exterminated. You're the only ones left. There's so few of you remaining. The world is against you. Anywhere you turn, there's going to be a relapse.
Right.
And even when we situate ourselves here, we have to protect ourselves because everybody around us doesn't want us here.
Is against us.
And so they're our enemy. Never mind, let's try to create conversation. Never mind asking them, are you our enemy? They were taught that.
Yes.
They were taught that. My family, my parents were taught, and they were also taught, Herzl, one of the founders of Zionism, created a slogan to interest European Jews to come and populate the Palestinian area
Right.
before Israel in the 1900s. The slogan he used, it was like brilliant marketing. He took a very familiar psalm from the Old Testament. And the Jews were wandering, and God came to the Jews and said, I will show you a land for a people without a land. Follow me. He took that stanza, which is every Jew knows. It's been like drilled. We know that. We know we're wanderers. We know we come from,
Yes.
right? And he added 3 words to it. Listen. And God came to the Jews and said, I will show you a land without a people, for a people without
About a land. Yes.
And that was repeated. That was the branding. Most people had most of the refugees who dared to come had no idea that it was so populated, and that there was a nation of Palestinians.
Wow.
And when 750 of them were fled,
Right.
they were told by the Brits and by the Jewish leaders, the Zionist leaders. This is before the actual creation of Israel. This is 46, 47, up to 48. They were told that they just wanted to leave. They left of their own accord. They weren't forced.
Yeah.
And they believed, they were
History
so
is written by the
traumatized
victor.
that they believed it.
Yes.
And to this day, and the Jews that I've met, that I know in America, I'll tell you something about American Jews that wasn't true in Montreal. Montreal, we were already othered. The dominant culture was French, English, Catholic, Protestant, very religious-based, language-based.
Yes.
We knew we were the third wheel, and we could just live our lives, but we had to keep to ourselves. So we were able to feel fine. We'll just live our own. We did this all over in Europe. We'll just do that. But the Jews there lived their Jewish identity in public. They didn't hide it. In America, the Jews learned in the early 1900s, in a land that was anti-Semitic, we're whitish. We're much more white than we are black, and identity politics here is black and white.
It is black.
We'll
and white
become
here.
white,
Yes.
and we'll pass. And we won't practice our identities in public, only in private. Our names, everybody will know, oh yeah, that's a Jew, he's a business person, blah, blah. But we're not going to practice our culture publicly. We're going to do it within our own families and within our own synagogues and within our own temples.
Well, that has been your experience
Yes.
here in Southern California. Now, I lived in Bixby Knolls, which was an Orthodox Jewish community, and I have
Where? Sorry, Bixby Knolls,
Long Beach.
Long Beach.
Orthodox Jewish community, and I have had Orthodox Jews here at Dominguez.
No,
So there
except for Orthodox Jews.
except for Orthodox
Except
Jews,
because the Orthodox Jews are a group unto themselves.
yes.
And they live almost like another culture within Judaism.
Yes.
And it's the same in Israel.
And they're very visible.
And they intend that. And that's like, and they don't really care about the outer world.
My understanding, though, because we are talking during a time when we've seen the worst attack on Palestinian people.
Terrible.
And after seeing a horrific attack on Israelis, though the context and the history needs to be understood, it can't be taken
Absolutely.
out. But my understanding is that the current Israeli government is some of the most conservative and orthodox that has been seen in Israel's existence, which is part of why we're seeing such extreme politics.
Yes.
And such lack of compassion.
Yes. There's never been, I don't believe there's ever been a majority in the government as it is today. Some of the key leaders of the government as extreme Orthodox, as
now.
no. And people don't know this, but Netanyahu, I always was suspicious of him, and he's been reelected 6 or 8 times.
And he is American, born and raised.
No,
Netanyahu, he grew up in Ohio, I think.
he may have, but
Or
his
maybe
family
Pennsylvania.
is foundational Israeli because his father was one of the leaders of one of the factions of Zionism early on in the
Right.
40s.
And his brother was a military hero.
That's not unusual. Every family has
Yes.
tons of those. But the father was a leader in the revisionist Zionism, which was a small terrorist organization
Wow.
that believed not just in the partition, but they wanted all of Palestine.
Right. So
from the
he-
beginning.
he
so
was
he
part of a
always had that.
terrorist
Always,
organization.
the father.
Yeah.
And that's how Netanyahu was raised. And I've always known that was his conviction, but the Israelis didn't believe it
Okay. Wow.
because they live in such fear of annihilation.
Well, fear is normally at the root of the worst we see in the world, either fear or greed, lust for power. I
Yes,
mean, sometimes
yes,
we see
yes,
lust for power,
yes.
but that fear, I asked you, I think that is very much a community and a personal journey of can I be safe in this world? Obviously, Israelis are not safe in Israel. That was quite clear to us all watching this recent exchange. Jews were not safe.
But they're not
in
safe
Europe.
because they're occupying Palestinians.
Well, yes.
It wasn't Iran or Saudi
no,
Arabia.
I'm not saying that.
Right?
I'm not
It's like
blaming
this is right.
No, I'm saying they are not safe there.
They believe they're not safe,
But-
but they would believe they're not safe anywhere.
Well, yes, seems to be a route that we're looking at.
That's
Yes.
the key route.
Yes.
That's the key route.
Now, as a woman, I
Yeah.
have wrestled with this question my whole life.
As a woman, yes,
Yes, how will
we
I be
have
safe?
to we have to
Yes.
create our own capacity to be safe. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah,
Assess reality.
yeah, yeah.
We have had a really rich conversation. Let me glance at my questions and make
Yes.
sure I'm not missing
I'm
something.
so sorry. I'm taking you through these
Oh, no.
labyrinth.
I apologize to students if you're feeling like confused or overwhelmed. We're just trying to introduce you to a very complicated and
Yeah.
confusing situation. So, welcome to the world of peace building.
Yes,
And Middle
Absolutely.
East culture.
absolutely.
The arts is a nice refuge, actually,
Yes.
in all of this.
Yes.
What do you, yes. Oh, here, this is important, yes. Campuses are being accused of anti-Jewish acts for protesting on behalf of Palestinian people and criticizing the current government of Israel. Many Israelis and Jews are likewise critical of the current government of Israel. Conflict resolution talks of separating people from problems and attacking the problems, not people. Is there any way to do this in this situation? It does not sound like it, given what you said about this fear, this legitimate paranoia being
No, I
at the
disagree.
root.
I've been since October 7th. I've been committed and working very diligently as an activist and as a healer.
Okay.
And as a dialogue facilitator. The way to approach this wrong, the wrong was the way Israel was created.
Okay.
The wrong was how unsafe Jews have been in the world for 2,000 years.
Ever, yes.
That is like, we can't correct that. That's like a given. That is a huge complexity.
Yes.
And it involves everybody. It involves all monotheisms, right? And we have to also recognize Christianity in the role here of America today,
well, especially today with evangelicals.
But It's the evangelicals who identify with the Zionists, because the Zionists and the
Well, not
evangelicals.
necessarily. I met with some when I was in the West Bank. It is very interesting how Palestinian Christians are educating Christians right now. It's a very slow work, though, because it is easy to feel like you are doing the right thing, supporting a nation created to protect people who were slaughtered, who were destroyed. That feels like the right thing to do, right? But there needs to be this education about the creation of Israel in the first place to help Christians understand the complexity. Many do not. So I got to meet many who were going to Bethlehem, staying with Christians there, and educating themselves about the situation, to a point where one of the Palestinians was advocating for a single state solution, where instead of dividing into two separate states
I've
like
always believed
India and
that.
Pakistan,
I've always believed that.
yeah, they try to just
It's never gonna
create what
happen.
everybody deserves. Yes.
Not in this century. It won't happen.
no.
It won't
Okay.
happen.
Let us close, because we've
I
done
know.
enough for
I know.
an
You can
intro
tell that we
course.
could talk for 10 hours.
What
Yeah.
do you appreciate most about Middle Eastern culture and arts? Just let's end on, because this is your life here, and I have said more than once on air, please visit the Middle East. Find a safe place in the Middle East, whether it's Jordan or, there's various places. Please don't go to
There will be-
Dubai and the shopping malls.
There will
But
be.
There
There
is
will
such there's such beauty there that I have not seen in
well,
any
it's
other
the
parts of the world.
ancient history, the ancient
sense
cultures
of humanity.
is there.
Yes.
And so, if you want to understand the history of humanity, basically, or at least of monotheistic humanity, because there's other, Asia is a whole other, and Africa are a whole other.
There's
right?
ancient civilization everywhere.
Right. So I'm talking about really the monotheistic traditions, which are there. The source and the ground and the core histories are there, and the beauty of them is conveyed and conducted and extended through the arts. So the arts, the artifacts of history really deliver a lot of understanding about culture. So if you want to really go underneath what's happening now and the geopolitical weaponization of this and that and this and that and this and that,
But to appreciate
you need to
culture.
go much deeper. You need to go underneath all of that and recognize it doesn't make sense because it doesn't make sense, because it's all manipulated. It's all being used and people using people.
Well, social media and media
Not
right
just
now.
that, but politics and governments are using people.
Absolutely, for self-interest.
And using the Gazans, no question, abusing them, using the Jews too, yet they don't know it. They think they're being supported. They're not, because without Palestine, there will be no Israel. There will be no Israel. That won't work. The other Arab countries will never let that happen.
Well, I saw that with Cyprus. Cyprus
right.
was in one of those situations.
It won't happen.
The other thing I'll say, Dorit, is the people of the Middle East are some of the most welcoming, hospitable,
Wonderful.
gracious people. The food, my God, forget going deep to appreciate culture. Just get together for a meal, spend time with people and get to know them. For me, the music and the spirit, there's a lot that's hard to put into words, but is really worth experiencing.
Yes, it's the spirit. And, and that's ancient. That's ancient.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for taking the time for me.
I'm
and my
exhausted.
students. I know, but it's a rare person that I can have such a candid, open conversation that is so needed. So many.
This is what people aren't.
want.
This is what people are not talking about.
No, and they want to understand, what can we do? What created this horrible situation?
This is what we can do.
Yes.
This is it.
Yes, really. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.